What I'm going to talk about today is my experience having learned from Deviant Olin, who's here, but I don't think is in the room, back at DEF CON 13, and since becoming heavily involved in the locksport community and running with Little John up here in front, the Columbus Locksport Group, and also being the administrative director of Locksport International. I've picked up some interesting tidbits about what people think about lockpicking, and that's what this presentation is all about. Plus, there's going to be some technical details here and there, too, just for kicks. But first, a little about me. I am, by trade, an enterprise architect. I am not a security guy. I'm actually a programmer, a dev. One of my main goals this year has been to bridge those two communities because I'm really tired of going to the security cons and having the security people gripe about the app devs, and then go to the app dev cons and they sit around and hold hands and smoke pot and sing Kumbaya. And so one of my main reasons professionally for being involved in both sides is to try to get some kind of a bridge between the two, but that's for another talk. I'm also a published author. I wrote for Rocks for years. I now write for the Dummies series, which anybody who knows me realizes that that's unusually appropriate. And yes, I am a Microsoft guy. Sorry about that. Very much a family guy. My family was supposed to be here with me, but my 11-month-old daughter got sick at the last minute, so I'm here by myself this time. I am actually a ninja. I train in ninjutsu in Columbus. Am 5th Q. You can't tell by looking at me. Please don't test me. I am also a home brewer. I make my own beer, enjoy it very much, in case you can't tell once again by looking at me. And I am a locksport enthusiast, which obviously is why I'm here today, but I use the same introduction slide for my talks for dev stuff, so people don't know that about me. Anyway, so I've been writing for quite a long time. I've actually been an author for about 12 years now, and it has absolutely nothing to do with that talk, but I love that slide, so I just put it up there. So how I got here real quick. So, DEF CON 15, I'm sorry. I learned from Deviant Olin at DEF CON 15 and how to pick locks. And how that came about was very amusing. I was there with my wife, Gabrielle, who is kind of neat. She's kind of a short, mid-sized, cute blonde, kind of elfin looking. And if you've been at the security con, there are very few short, cute, elfin blonde chicks running around. Especially at DEF CON. So she's wandering through, and I get this call at like 3 in the afternoon. You've got to come up here. They've got a whole place, a whole room where they teach you how to pick locks. It's awesome. I'm like, all right. I knew that was here, but I will go check it out. So I go trundling upstairs, and here is this table set up. And here's Dio sitting in the center with his little screen behind him giving his presentation. And here is Gabrielle seated directly in front of him on the opposite side of the table, surrounded by all these 20-something guys. And sitting between them is a bottle of Jack Daniels, half empty. That was new. She sat there for 8 hours, SE'd the guys around her to convince to keep her seat when she had to go pee or whatever, and learned practically everything there was. Well, I ended up getting into it quite a bit as well. I came back, decided to start the Columbus Locksport International chapter because I'd met some of the Locksport International guys, and I thought that both my dev friends and my ninjutsu friends in Columbus would be interested in learning a really cool new hobby. When I went back to DEF CON 17, we had a very successful, thriving chapter with really not so much support because LI was kind of on the downslide at the time. I met Doug Farr, who had just taken over the group. And Doug needed a whipping boy. So when I get back from DEF CON, I get a text message. Oops, sorry, went too far. When I get back, I get a text message from Doug saying, hey, you've been promoted to the administrative director of Locksport International. What? What the hell does that mean? So I texted back, what the hell does that mean? He's like, well, basically you're my bitch. Oh, okay, well that's awesome. So anything that Doug doesn't feel like doing with the group kind of goes to me. And that's been a lot of fun. Since then, the group has moved to the Columbus Idea Foundry, which is very similar to the level 1 hacking group here in Louisville. They have it's a fabrication hacker facility. They've got a MakerBot, they've got a big CNC router, and they've got a forge, and they've got a MIG welder and a TIG welder and a laser etcher and all this other various and sundry stuff. Awesome for Locksport. All the cool little widgets you want to build to do things, you can do them all there. That's for another talk too. And then finally I end up here. talking about all the stuff I've learned while following this big complicated path I spent way too much time talking about. So why locksport? One of the things I've been very interested in is why they came up with the term locksport instead of just saying lockpicking. Does lockpicking just sound too much like nose picking? I don't really know. But there's kind of a philosophical as well as a practical edge to all of this, and it got me thinking a lot about this. So I would pay attention when I told people that I practice lockpicking as a hobby. And some people I would say, I'm involved in the locksport community, and some people I'd say, I pick locks. And then I would get kind of a feel of the 4 different kinds of people that I would get responses from. And that kind of led to a fascinating psychological experiment with relating to lockpicking. So the big meta lesson here is that opinions are like navels. It's a family show, guys. I mean, come on. So I get these 4 kind of responses. I get lock what? You do what? You do what for a hobby? And then I get the picking locks is for criminals. Well, no, not really so much, but that's neither here. And then I get lockpicking is serious business. You shouldn't be screwing around with by calling it sport. Oh, okay. Hey, I think I'm supposed to be hitting my button when I say these. Yes, there we go. I'm sorry, I thought that was automatic. So those are the first 3 types. The incredulous saying, what? The lock what? The belligerent saying, lockpicking is for criminals. And then the security snobs, which believe that lockpicking is only for the most serious of stuff and you shouldn't be teaching the unwashed masses. And then the vast majority, which are the cool kids, that say, wow, this is really cool. It's something I've never done before. It's interesting. Let's learn more about it. So let's start with the people that think that the lockpicking is just for movies and go from there. So the incredulous are by far the most fun. And they are the people who genuinely believe that lockpicking is something that's only done in the movies. It's like the wizard casting a fireball spell in some sci-fi movie or something like that. There are a large number of people that genuinely think that you can't open a lock without a key. A tremendously large number of people. If you folks spend most of your social time around other security people, you're all professional paranoids. You understand that most of security is theater. The tremendous majority of people out there do not understand that. And it is very amusing to get, you can't really open a lock without a key. I mean, if you could do that, God, that would be awful. You wouldn't even believe how often I've heard this. I teach lockpicking at the Columbus Idea Foundry, as it turns out, to regular public people, mostly artists, actually. Their list of classes, which is how they fund the thing, has, forging Christmas ornaments, making neat things with our laser etcher, learn how to use the computer-operated router to build furniture, pick locks. So I get a really unusual mix of people in there, and you'd be amazed how many people come in thinking that it's like some kind of magic I'm going to teach them. Anyway, in contrary to being secret knowledge, I personally, and this says 500 on my speaker notes, it's very funny, as I've personally taught over 500 people to pick, by now it's got to be well over 1,000. And the grandparents of the sport have taught tens of thousands. I mean, D.O., who's here, is going to speak later today, or maybe tomorrow, D.V. Nolan, we should absolutely catch his talk, has unquestionably taught in the 5 digits. Skylar Town, another grandparent of the sport, has unquestionably taught well into 5 digits. And those people have also created large numbers of videos and training materials that go online that you can very easily find and learn how to pick. The question is why are these people missing this? And the reality is that most people have an altered perception of security. These are the people that walk by and genuinely believe that a no trespassing sign on a front gate will keep people out of the gate. A great example, at my first locksport class, oh God, it must have been a year ago now, at the Foundry, the local paper, the Columbus Dispatch, I'm from Columbus, I don't know if I said that, the Columbus Dispatch came and did a story on me, which I thought was, well, on lockpicking in general, not specifically on me, which I thought was really awesome. And the guy who came, Joe Blundo, he is an old hat. He's one of those well-known guys in Columbus. Everybody's read his stuff. And he isn't surprised by anything anymore. But he brought this photographer with him, who was this nice enough lady who clearly fell into the class of the incredulous. And she knew about lockpicking because she was utterly convinced that her house in New York had been burgled because the lock had been picked. There wasn't a chance in hell that she left it unlocked, perchance, or that somebody slipped the lock, or that somebody got in through a window. She was completely convinced that someone had picked the lock with some kind of magical knowledge, not realizing that there is the locks as a concept are only really as good as the user that are using them. And while they can be picked, they usually aren't anyway. But let's start with the basics real quick here for those people who don't know, and I'll kind of buzz through this. I know probably most of this crowd knows the basics of locksport, but we'll do it anyway. This is a pick. A pick by itself does no good at all. You need a tensioner as well. The idea is that you are going to create the same kind of rotational tension on a lock that you would with a key, but you're going to exploit a flaw in the lock in order to actually move it. All right, and I'll show you in just a second here. But first, let me talk about where I get my training materials. A very quick advertisement for Dio, which I slipped in here for this con because Singris is here. The next 7 animations, were created by Deviant Olem on a slide deck that's copyleft out on his website, deviating.net, that most everyone uses to teach lockpicking now. They're just that good. And I use them with permission in this deck. However, because we have an unusual circumstance here, I can tell you, go buy his book if you have any interest at all. It is fucking awesome. And he can teach anyone to pick. And it's 30%. I mean, I think you have to buy a couple to get 30% off, but if you're buying anything else, you get 30% off. They have them in stock here. You can read it on the way home on the plane. Absolutely get it. But that's my ad for him, and thank him very much for letting me use his, letting me use his animations and drawings in this presentation. So, if you look at the front of a lock, you'll see a little dingle hanging down. And that little dingle is the first key pin in the lock. If you could take off the front of the lock, which would be awesome, you would see that there's actually 3 pieces of metal in there of any significance. The lowest one is called the key pin. It's sitting on the shoulders of the keyway inside of the lock cylinder. Above it, the blue one is the binding pin. The binding pin prevents the cylinder from turning inside the body of the lock, right? Because if you try to rotate the yellow piece, wait a minute, I might have an animation. Do I have the animation? Oh, look at that. If you try to rotate the yellow cylinder inside the body of the lock, the binding pin will stop the lock from rotating. Above that, we have the spring. The spring is holding everything down against the shoulders of the keyway, right? So you can't just flip the lock over and things will move, supposedly. So, if you were to insert something into the lock, say perchance a key, which would be an awesome choice, you would lift, and it was exactly the right height, you would lift the key pin high enough that the binding pin would be above the circle between the cylinder and the body. That's called the shear line. The binding pin would be above the shear line and the key pin would be below the shear line. That would allow you then to rotate the lock, right? Because there's nothing stopping the lock from moving. However, of course, it's not that simple. There are 5 pins, as it turns out, in the lock, and all of them are at different heights. However, there is a hack that we can exploit here. There is a flaw in the manufacture of all this style of lock, which is called a pin tumbler lock, that we can exploit for our uses. And that flaw is that those 5 pins are not in a straight line. So if we use our tensioner to put some amount of rotational pressure on the lock, only 1 pin at a time will actually bind in the shear line. We can find that pin by using a pick. So, the general idea is this in lockpicking, and this is the magic that everybody thinks is magic with the incredulous group, is that we're going to put some amount of rotational pressure on the cylinder inside the body. It will make 1 pin bind. Now, when we talk pressure, I'm talking a tiny amount of pressure. The best line I've ever heard was 2 butterflies. 2 butterflies of pressure, okay, on the tension wrench. One pin will bind. We can find that one pin because with our hook, we can test for one of three kinds of pressure. One will clearly be bound up. It will be hard to push. One will be springy, okay? It's clearing all the way up through the spring. And the third will be loose. Obviously, that binding pin is already above the shear line, and now there's air between the key pin and the binding pin. Once we have found all 5 binding pins, which will go in some order, we can then turn the lock and it will come open. That's all there is to it, folks. That's 90% of the locks used in the United States, right there, pin tumbler lock. 75% of them are 5 pins or fewer. It's blindingly easy to actually open most locks used in the United States. Now it's talking about security locks and some wafer locks and auto locks and things. There's a big topic here, but it gets a little bit more difficult. But for the basic stuff, it's really incredibly simple to open. So, oh yeah, and I wanted to slip in the term here that now you understand that when you're watching a TV show and somebody picks a lock with one pick, you can't do that. One pick is called a key. So yeah, by the way, that image, that image came from a locksmith site, just for the record. When I was researching for this and reading locksmith sites, this picture was actually on the locksmith site. So I didn't put the locksmith's name up there, even though I borrowed their image, because, I mean, come on. Okay, so let's talk about the second group, the belligerent. The belligerent are those people who think that I'm training everybody to be a burglar, and that when somebody breaks into their house, they are gonna sue, goddammit, because it must be me who did it. And yes, there are those people out there. This, by the way, is a picture of the aforementioned Schuyler Towne, the current pretty face of the locksport movement. He recently had an interview on the BBC. No, I'm not kidding. You can go to the BBC website and search for Schuyler Towne, and you will find him. It was awesome. He is the face of locksport right this moment. His website's openlocksport.com, and he's doing some pretty awesome stuff with lock history and kind of the sociology around this. Sort of the same stuff as in this topic. But the point is that we're probably not just teaching burglars, because frankly, the people who are going to come to the Idea Foundry to take a class to learn how to pick locks probably aren't going to steal stuff. I mean, honestly, if people are going to steal stuff, they're going to steal stuff whether I teach them to pick locks or not. I mean, there's nothing you can do about some things. But some people just can't be convinced of that. For an example, and this is, you might be able to read this right now. So when my article got published in the Columbus Dispatch, they have a formula where you can leave comments on the website after an article. And Alex, who owns the Columbus Idea Foundry, left a note, the first comment on there, "Oh, it was a great article, Joe. Glad Bill shared his passion for lock sport, blah, 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 blah." Alex is one of those guys. He's a circus ringleader. He's awesome. He's awesome. And one of the remaining comments was by American Patriot. And American Patriot says, "Publishing such information for the general public would seem to be a bad idea. Society should be protected from those who are inclined to be dishonest or tempted to become a part of the criminal element who would use such information for illicit gain. Therefore, a registry should be maintained covering all who are trained in such techniques." I'm not making this stuff up, folks. This guy is not a troll, okay? He is a regular poster on the Columbus Dispatch website. He genuinely believes it, and what's more, he represents a broad a broad segment of at least the Columbus population. Sorry that criminals tend to create situations for which all of us pay a penalty. Those on such a registry need have no fear as long as they do not use their knowledge illegally. Some things you just can't make up. Anyway, criminals don't use picks. It's just a fact. They don't. The criminals do not care about leaving a mark when they enter your home. They're just going to use what we call in the physical security industry a brick. For the record, and this will become important in a minute, picking a lock for purposes of getting egress is called non-destructive entry, or NDE. And in the legal circles, that's how it's referred to when you can find it, and I'll get to that in a minute. The fact is that most locks used in business settings to protect anything worthwhile are actually kind of hard to pick. The majority of consumer locks, like padlocks, are blindingly easy to pick. Things you can go buy at the hardware store are blindingly easy to pick. Most locks that are put in place by locksmiths with somebody who actually cares about security are logarithmically more difficult, require special tools, special information, and a large amount of special knowledge that once again isn't secret, but is big. It's a lot of it. So, I don't know, for whatever that's worth. I went to find out how much actual non-destructive entry was being used for criminal activity. So I went and I got to make a note about this because I never could remember the name of the organization I got the data from. But as it turns out, there's a national organization that stores crime data that gathers from police stations and sheriffs all over the United States, and categorizes it and publishes a bunch of great numbers if you're into analytics, which I'm not really, but I was very interested for this. So I went to find out, they had burglary information down to what caused it. I mean, how or what the egress point was. Whether it was the front door, the window, or the back door, the garage, the basement, the door was left unlocked, access via storage, or got in through the second floor. And I noticed that non-destructive entry isn't actually listed as a category of something, because clearly somebody could get in through the second door window or the back door storage or something. It's not necessarily it doesn't add up to 100%. Let's put it that way. So I thought NDE would certainly be one of the categories, but it wasn't. So I emailed them and asked them why it wasn't, and they replied that it's so rare that nobody even bothers to track it. There are some city organizations that have it as a category, but they never report any numbers on it because nobody does it. It's much easier to just break a window or just walk in when it's unlocked anyway. Another reason for this, even for residential locks, and anybody who's tried it over here, lockpicking, unless you're blindingly lucky, is slow. Even really good lockpickers, under pressure, even with good tools, if they're under pressure, only about 20% of the time are they just going to pop a lock. It's a factor of luck and the layout of the lock and how you are visualizing what's going on inside the lock. And under pressure, I mean, even really good lock pickers often take several minutes to get into a very simple lock, relatively speaking. Burglars will spend 60 seconds trying to gain entry to your property, and then they will leave. They're not idiots. So it's simply too slow. And I think that's the reason why it doesn't show up on any of the figures. However, I'm going to talk about this first. There are other tools that still fall into the category of non-destructive entry, but don't fall into the category of locksport. For instance, bump keys and lock slipping. Those are things that we just don't teach them in locksport because they're not sporting. There's no fun to using a bump key or slipping a lock. It is interesting knowledge, yes, but it's not very fun. But I'll tell you a little bit about how bump keys work real quick. I was going to say I actually talk about fun knowledge and forbidden knowledge and showing off to your friends. I actually carry a bump key for a quick set A1QA, just to show people what a bump key is and how easy it would be for somebody to carry one when I'm trying to scare someone into believing that security is theater. But that's neither here nor there. The way a bump key works is like this. It's basically a fancy raking maneuver. And there are two main methods for using it. The key part is that you are creating chaos inside the lock, and depending upon that level of chaos to open the lock. So one method is if you have a key that you have especially manually filed, which is very nice, down to its lowest levels, which is how a bump key is created more or less. You can find instructions online if you're interested. You can use the pull method, which is where you simply pull the key out to one pin stack past where it goes in, smack it with a hammer while you're putting a little bit of pressure on it, and you're depending on the physics similar to pool ball physics to get the pins to pop up above the shear line. I don't know if you've ever seen the pull shot, and there's actually a great image in Deviant's deck where if you get two pool balls actually touching, You can depend on being able to hit the first one with your cue ball and move the second one without moving the first one. Exactly the same physics apply here. There's probably an actual principle to that. I should get the name of that one of these days. If you have a professionally milled key where the tip has been milled off and the shoulder has been shortened, you can use the push method, which is where you can just set the key in normally and depend on the foreshortened key length to do exactly the same methodology. The problem with bump keys is you got to have the key. Once again, majority of residential locks use one keyway. There are a couple out there, but frankly, they're not used very heavily. So you can carry maybe 2 or 3 keys and be able to get into any residential property you want to. But businesses and anybody who cares about security, even that one next step up, there's a tremendous number of keys. And you have to have a key that fits the lock in order to cut it into a bump key. Anybody have a key at work that says do not duplicate? The reason they don't want you to duplicate them is because the key blanks are actually protected by the manufacturers often. Best, which is the example that we have here, is a small format interchangeable core style lock that's extremely common in Ohio. I don't know how far south they go, but a lot of major a lot of major businesses use them. Kroger, for instance, is a company. Their whole organization is keyed with bests because it's very simple to take the master key, slide it in, turn it, and just take the entire lock out of the keyway or out of the body of the door and replace it with another one instead of having to rekey it or whatever. And that's neither here nor there. The point is that Best uses 16 keyways, and they actually do rotate through them. And you can't just go to eBay and buy a Best blank. It's just, they protect them too well. You have to go through locksmith to get it. Now, is that to say that no one is carrying 16 Bests? I guarantee that's not the case because I have them. So if I have them, anyone can get them because I'm not that smart. But it will stop the casual criminal from making one, whereas the casual criminal can make a copy of his own house key, grind it down to all 9s with a file, and then use it to get into your house because it's probably the same keyway. He's probably not going to be able to do that with his work key. Lock slipping is another technology to open the door using non-destructive entry, but doesn't really in the realm of locksport. And it more or less is using some tool to move the deadbolt out of the way without actually manipulating the lock. It is kind of an interesting technique, but it's not much for locksport. So it kind of falls out of the category of this, but I do want to tell you a story about David Niera. April 10th, 2008, a police blotter, 64-year-old male Caucasian, entered a condominium complex in West Los Angeles using a credit card to slip the perimeter grounds gate lock. He then proceeded to go from house to house and slipping the front door lock and removing jewelry from the victim's home and then leaving the same way he came in. In 2008, there were 19,204 burglaries, and 61 of them used lockpicking, non-destructive entry, in LA. Apparently, they don't report those, or it was too small for the nationals don't recognize it. I don't know why. In 2009, there were 18,786 of them, and 0 used lockpicking. As it turns out, apparently, David Niera was the only burglar using lockpicking in all of West LA, where half of the goddamn population is a burglar. There was one person using non-destructive entry in West LA. So the quote from the comments from the police officer that wrote the blotter entry, in addition, since the arrest of David Niera, lockpicking slip-lock residential burglaries have virtually ceased in West Los Angeles. That was it. He was the only one. So much for retraining the next level of burglars. The fact is that thieves are going to steal whether we teach them or not. I teach people my favorite lock to teach spool pins is the Master at 140. It's by far my favorite lock to pick. It's an awesome little lock, by the way, for $6. That's going to resist a lot of picking efforts from somebody with a bobby pin and a screwdriver anyway. If you go look for the Master 140 online, just type Master 140 into Google, the first 7 links are how to pick it. And then finally the 8th is how to buy one. This information is no longer difficult to find. So even though, yes, there is some potential that someone I teach could then go steal something, you know, if they knew they needed to get into a lock anyway, they're going to get that information whether I give it to them or not. So that's my deal with the belligerent. The final group is the security snobs, and if I offend anybody, feel free to beat me up afterwards. As it turns out, the CISSP added a clause for physical security in the test in '95 or sometime. And suddenly it was kind of hip to learn how to pick locks. And that's sort of what drew a lot of this into the security community, this lockpicking, this separate lockpicking physical security stuff into the InfoSec community, was this change in the CISSP exam. So every InfoSec guy in the world suddenly used it as an excuse to carry picks. And why not, right? It's fun and interesting. And, do you need to actually learn to pick to be a security pro? No, you don't. But is it fun and interesting and forbidden knowledge and worth learning? Hell yes, it is. So everyone wanted to learn how to pick. Locksport villages turned up everywhere, all the security conferences. When you think about training for the CISSP, you think about the nice classroom, and when you actually get there, this is what you get, is the Locksport village. This was at B-Sides Cleveland, by the way. This was the Locksport village. We called it the Locksport Tiki Hut. So there's legitimate users of lockpicking, and those people are, by and large, locksmiths and police, military, red team members, security, landlords, and recovery organizations. And those people do largely have a kind of a hold on the world of lockpicking as far as legitimate uses are concerned. Some of those people do fall into the categories that are met by this conference. I mean, red team members legitimately often show how easy it is to get into a phone cabinet by taking out their lockpicks and opening it. I mean, the fact is that most phone cabinets are locked by these simple wafer locks, and they're very easy to get into. But they run into the same problem as anybody else, which is time. The same problem the burglars had. Lockpicking, as taught in Locksport, is extraordinarily slow. We're doing it for a challenge, for fun, for a hobby. And the people who are doing it for money, time is money, folks. They need to get in, get out, get done, get billed, be happy, everything's ready to go. I mean, think about a locksmith. He's going to spend 5 minutes trying to pick your front door and get out a drill. It's $60 an hour. It's just cheaper to drill the lock than replace it. So the people who use it legitimately will tend to use different, once again, very similar to criminals, right? The people who legitimately have to open locks non-destructively will use their own technologies. Also, somewhat difficult to get technologies. The pick gun, for instance, is a great example of a way to open a lock quickly if you need to, and often, especially police and recovery, use it quite regularly. The way a pick gun works, and again, thanks to Deviant for the animations, is exactly the same way a bump key works. It's using that same physical principle as the pool balls and creating some level of chaos inside the lock. It is basically a rake. It does require a tensioner, which isn't in the image. But effectively what you're trying to do is bump those binding pins up above the shear line and then turn the lock just as they're up there. That's more or less what you're after. Also, raking is an incredibly quick way to get into a lock. Very different from the lifting attack that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. Raking is truly creating chaos inside the lock. You use a rake, something shaped vaguely like a key, in order to create chaos inside the lock instead of the long wand that's used by the pick gun. And then you stick it in there and you jam it around like a caffeinated squirrel. And eventually the lock will come open, probably, or not. It's not a very technical method of opening a lock. You know nothing about the lock when you're done. And while you'll see at lockpicking competitions people who are trying to open a lock for speed often use it because it is very fast, you don't know anything about the lock when you're done, so it's not so much the most sporting way to get into a lock. Nonetheless, a lot of people use it, including those people. So professionals that use lockpicking, they're in it to do it as quickly as they can. And so they have their own sets of tools. They are concerned that people who learn locksport as a hobby are going to dilute the knowledge that they can legitimately build time for. And I buy into that to a certain level, but the fact is that we're teaching very, very different things, for whatever it's worth. So there's the fourth kind. After the three deniers, there's the cool kids in the group, and the cool kids are the people who get it. These are the people that say, hey, this is kind of interesting. My line is always, I compare it to doing a Rubik's Cube in the dark. It's a fascinating mental and physical puzzle that you can do anytime, anywhere. If you spend a lot of time thinking about code or watching logs scroll by, it's an awesome hobby that you can sit and keep a couple locks on your monitor and carry your picks with you if you've got a worthwhile case, and then keep your hands occupied with something legal and safe for the workplace. So, how are we not teaching burglary? Well, we're teaching the base exploit, not how to use the scripts. Okay? We're teaching how to individually access a lock with a lifter, decode it, the direct method, rather than the tools that people have created to make the exploit easier to access, right? To equate it to the security industry. We are non-destructively accessing locks, unmounted locks, as compared to a burglar who is usually destructively accessing locks that are mounted, usually to your front door. We're hobby pickers. We get a group of guys that get together, guys and girls, just as many of either. Actually, my experience has been that women are much better pickers. That's been my experience. I've taught hundreds and hundreds, and by far, the women outpick the guys every time. I think it's about lighter touch. I don't know. But I mean, every guy I know who has trouble picking is because they're heavy-handed. They either overlift the pins or they put too much pressure on the tensioner, one of the two. Women never have that problem. I don't know, for what it's worth. Locksport is also all about competition, which is different from, obviously, what the professionals and the criminals do. Here's a picture of our own little John here with his miraculously, fantastically constructed Connect 4 board, which is a tremendous amount of fun. The basic idea is we had teams of 3 working on a pile of padlocks. And when it was your turn, you had 2 minutes. Your team had to open at least one padlock. Then you could put a chip up on the board. And your idea, of course, was to get 4 in a row. And it is a hoot to do that. It's a lot of fun. You learn a lot about picking under pressure, specifically that you can open pretty much any damn padlock you want to, whether you're under pressure or not, is what we largely learned. But that's neither here nor there. There's a huge community revolved around Locksport. Locksport International, the group that I'm involved in, has about 232 members in various meetup groups in our 11 chapters all over the world. Key Picking, which is a very popular Locksport forum, has 2,200 members. And the number one lockpicking forum online is Lockpicking 101. And it is not just a hobby forum. There's a tremendous number of professionals that hang out there as well. So the lines get blurred a little bit, but still, 54,000 members. I mean, come on. And fully 17,000 of them are on the have posted within or have visited within the last month list. It is an active community of people. Very surprising to me when I first got there. And more community is coming. A great example is Skylar Town's organization, Open Locksport. He got that started by using Kickstarter. He asked initially, I think, for $5,000 to set up a set of lockpicks exactly the way he wanted to do it. Well, you can see the numbers up here. He got way more interest than he ever imagined and introduced a whole new community of people to the idea that Locksport can be something that's fun and interesting and maybe happen to improve security for the people around us as well. Locksport International is a group that back in the spring of 2005, hacker by the name of Josh Neckrep, and a couple of other guys who were working on lockpicking101.com decided to start an actual club with a charter with a group to bring enthusiasts together into local groups that had some kind of an international backing. There were a couple other large groups at the time, like Tool in the Netherlands and SSDev and stuff like that, but there was no broad-based sporting club. Most of the people that were involved in lockpicking were involved in it from the research perspective, not so much from the others. So the idea was that it would be better for people to create local lockpicking clubs so that you can do hands-on teaching, and then have some kind of a hierarchy among the chapter presidents so that the information can be shared. And these are a couple of the pictures of the guys that are involved in it, with the exception of course, myself. We have some illustrious folk involved, and I'm very glad to be involved in that group. And one of the core things that we do, when I remember to teach them, is have a pretty stringent set of ethical rules, which you say, yeah, rules are just rules, though. It's just something else for somebody to break. Yes, that's true, but you'd be surprised how simple it is to say to somebody, don't pick a lock you don't own. You could screw it up, and as it turns out, opening a door and walking into someplace is against the goddamn law. So please don't do it. And people go, oh yeah, okay, all right, that makes sense. Now, does that mean they're not going to do it? No, but at least you've set some kind of a baseline of what the ethical standards are. If somebody breaks it, somebody breaks it. There's nothing you can do, but at least a baseline has been set. Some understanding has been set, just like in the firearm movement, firearm community. It's understood that you're not going to go shoot people. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Same thing's true in the locksport world. We also require people to abide by local laws. You can't start a chapter in some place where there's laws against maintaining picks, which, boy, I really hope there isn't in Kentucky. We also make it very clear that we are not locksmiths. I personally recommend to all of you not to open locks for friends. There's always the classic, your buddy calls and says, hey, I'm locked out of my apartment, can you come let me in? You think, actually, you're thinking to yourself, isn't that your girlfriend's apartment? And weren't you guys fighting yesterday? And you don't really know what's going on. So I just tell people, no, I don't have my picks with me. I can't open it, or I'm just not going to, or whatever. That's the easiest way to go about things. And yes, even though at the beginning I said sharing of information is good, yada, 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 I personally make a concerted effort not to teach punks how to open lockers. I mean, there's no reason to make life more difficult on the people who are trying to run schools and universities. Oh, I didn't, okay. So, ostensibly Locksport International is about competition. Oh, okay, well, goodness gracious. And because of that, Locksport is kind of a sport in that way, right? You're sitting, it's an actual legitimate timed event that you are sitting and doing. And here's a couple of pictures of a couple of the things that we do. There's Skylar and Doug Farr doing Lockpick Wizard at DEF CON last year. That's an awesome video you should look up. But really, what we're really about is getting together with friends and drinking beer and just screwing around with people, trying to get in the lock faster than your buddy, seeing what you can do that other people can't do, sharing interesting knowledge, and have a good time with new friends. Do we do a little bit of security research? Do we happen to teach people how insecure they really are? Try to lower the curtain on security theater a little bit? Yeah, sure, we do some of that, but really it's about having a good time. So, is Locksport a sport? We as a security community kind of get to define this. We're the front end of what's becoming a very public-facing thing. I mean, there have been, go type Locksport into Google. There have been a lot of articles and a lot of mainstream publications, a lot of newspaper reporters, a lot of film crews out to see things. We can show that this is something that's worth doing. And that's a worthwhile charter, if you ask me. I mean, I'm not looking for Locksport to go to the 2020 Olympics or anything here, folks. I'm just trying to teach some interesting knowledge and have a good time. And this is an awesome way to do it. It doesn't take a lot of space or money or anything like that. So here's my information. If anybody wants more about Locksport, I've got a couple of cards here. As well, you can feel free to just shout at me in the hall. I'll be here for the rest of the con. And thank you very much for coming out. Hope to see you later in the con. Okay.
There's a party tonight.
Oh.
10 to 2.
10 to 2. There's an important fact.